Welcome to Making Democracy Work, a monthly series brought to you by the League of Women Voters of Honolulu and Olelo. Each month we take up topics of community interest and we talk with distinguished experts on the subject. Today we are going to talk about the national election. Our midterm elections just passed, and our guests are Neil Milner, Professor Emeritus of University of Hawaii at Manoa, and Chad Blair, political reporter for Civil Beat, the online newspaper. So thank you for appearing today, and wasn't that an interesting election?
Well, I guess, yeah, it was interesting, all right. It was predicted that what was going to happen happened, but it was much more in the direction of the Republicans thing, as much because there were certain things about pollsters that missed that movement. But it was a pretty good sweep for the Republicans, and we can talk about this later. I think where it's really important is in the governor's offices.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they have a majority now, I believe, of governorships, legislatures as well.
Yes.
Increased their margins in the House, and of course took over the Senate. You know, even though it was predicted that it was very likely that the Senate was going to fall to Republicans, I think Democrats are still shell-shocked. There was at least a half a dozen races where they thought, they're going to pull this off, and that included Udall in Colorado and Landry in Louisiana, who's in a runoff right now and is probably going to lose.
Yes.
Begich in Alaska, Pryor in Arkansas, and a few others. But in fact, even none in Georgia. None of them really were even all that close, really. It was a much larger, greater loss than expected, and I think in many ways the country has been painted red, in contrast to Hawaii, as blue as ever.
They almost lost Virginia, too, which
right.
nobody accepted.
Right?
Mark Warner, yes, that's right. Yep.
And yet the initiatives did not go in that direction.
That's right. We can now smoke marijuana in more states for all.
But I think marijuana has become one of those idiosyncratic issues. It's not like same-sex marriage where the division, even though people have moved more in the direction of acceptance, there's still a Republican-Democrat difference. I think that we can no longer talk about the legalization of marijuana in terms of a liberal versus conservative issue, not the least of which reason is this state, which purports to be very liberal, is nowhere close to adopting that kind of marijuana thing, and in fact still doesn't have its act together on how to legalize, how to regulate medical marijuana.
They finally moved the medical marijuana program out of the Department of Public Safety, which controls the prisons, after all, and put it in the Department of Health, where it absolutely belongs. It is a medical situation. Patients get permits, prescriptions from doctors and so forth, but it took them forever to do that. There have been, over the years, always introduced ideas to either decriminalize or even legalize marijuana, tax it, regulate it. We all know that marijuana is very good here in Hawaii. It is, in fact, the law enforcement agencies, year after year after year, are able to block that. They oppose this, and they've been saying, let's wait and see what happens in Washington and Colorado. Well, guess what? It's working, and the states are making millions of dollars.
If it were a referendum, I wonder if it would pass here. The legislature, it's just too complicated. Our legislature, whatever people think about it being all Democratic, is extraordinarily cautious. And the state is not terrific in implementing complex social programs. Part of it is because they don't put enough money into it, but the other is that there just isn't a good track record here, and it'll be interesting to see if that changes in regard to pre-K education, where this is going to be pretty complicated to do.
And of course, that fell, and we're going back to local here, and I know your point was the national thing. You know, one thing I'm noticing already, having spoke to Brian Schatz and looked at what Tulsi Gabbard's been trying to do, and even Mark Takai, you're hearing them say things like, well, I'm going to find ways to work with Republicans. Gabbard, just the other day, co-sponsored some legislation by Aaron Schock of Illinois, I believe is his name. I don't remember the exact title, but they're pushing more and more to try and do that. Brian Schatz just went to Guantanamo Bay with a bipartisan coalition from the Senate. You hear them saying more and more, I'm going to find ways to reach out across the aisle, recognizing that that's the only way they're going to be able to get anything done for Hawaii in the next 2 years.
And I must say I have no faith in that working at all.
Yes.
I think
Such a cynic,
Such
Leo.
a cynic. No. I think it's going to work in small ways. In the small ways that our senior senator used to make it work. I mean, he has this great reputation. There's these little things that you can do, establish relationships, get those kinds of things. But I can't imagine Guantanamo Bay bipartisan. I don't care if they all fly down to Cuba, have a good time, then go over to that island and drink rum together. Once they get back, it's not about people who are nasty people. There certainly are some of those. It's about the fact that you've got political parties now. Congress is divided perfectly. The ideology of the party matches the ideology of the people holding office. Every Republican elected to replace another Republican in Congress is more conservative than the one he or she replaced. And every Democrat who replaced a Democrat is more liberal than he or she replaced. So you've got parties in which they're pretty polarized. They're polarized on the basis of ideas. You do have some troublemakers like Ted Cruz, who there's a kind of bipartisan distaste for him. But I think that when it's like that, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to spend a lot of time crossing the aisle, because it's not your source of influence anymore. Your source of influence, for every time that our legislators do this, and I think it's important to do what they say they're going to do, for every time they do that, there's probably, I'm guessing, 15 times, 20 times when you're going to rather work to establish your relationship within that Democratic caucus, where you can get support from them.
You know, the irony is the leader coming into the Senate, Mitch McConnell, and John Boehner, who's going to stay on in the House, they actually have been around for a very long time, and they come from a time where you actually, compromise was not a bad word, that government, as Bob Dole used to say, does some good things, and let's get things going. But then when you hear someone like a Ted Cruz or others say, instead of helping President Obama fund his immigration program, which was just announced, all by executive action, that we're not going to fund it, and to do that, we're going to shut the government down. I mean, what is the purpose there? I mean, wait 2 years and try and elect a Republican if you don't like the plan. But good God, there's millions of people working and living in this country and contributing. It's stalled in the Senate, the immigration bill, but that's the kind of knee-jerk reaction. We're just going to shut the government down.
Well, and the Boehner and McConnell have been pretty clear
that they're not going to let that happen.
Okay, but
We'll see.
We'll see.
Right,
That's exactly right. We'll see.
But I think they are people that are would like to work across the aisle, even though they've had problems with the president, and it may be this particular president and so forth. There's all sorts of theories about that. But the whole purpose of government, I think, is to actually serve the people that sent you there. Mind you, there are people that sent them there that want them to shut the government down. I recognize that.
But that again, that brings up how if you're in the House of Representatives, we're talking Cruz is not. If you're in the House of Representatives and you're elected from a very one-party district, which most of them are, it gives you all kinds of latitude to be obstreperous, and that's the case. If this were a world in which people were trying to work across both sides of the aisle would be working to take the very cumbersome and flawed Obamacare Act. I don't mean it's fundamentally flawed. We can talk about that another time. But this is a huge endeavor. There's all kinds of things that should be looked at and checked and fixed, kind of the way we did with the war on poverty, but it's not going to happen.
Right.
We'll see whether the House still has another vote. How many have they had now?
9, 10. Oh, no, they're going to have another one.
50, I believe.
Is it?
It may even be in the hundreds, for I know, to repeal Obamacare. But Neil's absolutely right. There's things that need to be done to improve that law.
Yes.
You know, Republicans may be surprised, but it actually seems to be working. People are signing up for that. They seem to be grateful. I realize there are cost and other concerns, but that's what you do. You fine-tune. That's what government does.
Right. I want to get back to marijuana, because one of the problems, even where it's legal,
You have like a personal interest in this?
It's okay, Carl. We're not judging.
That's right.
there is no legal way for them to start the marijuana distribution, right? There's no legal interstate distribution
Well,
of marijuana.
It doesn't go across the border. So
Right.
if you're in Oregon, in Washington, Oregon just passed it.
I
didn't
guess
they?
Oregon passed
Washington,
something, yeah.
Colorado, Alaska just did, and so forth, because it's considered a Schedule I drug at the
Right.
federal level, therefore equivalent to LSD and heroin and so forth. You can't do that, but I don't know how many people are going to stop people
Yeah.
at the border and so forth. But that's the question. So far, the Obama administration has said, we'll just back off of this. We're not going to make it a priority to go in and bust Washington or Colorado for having these marijuana shops, and it just isn't worth their time and resources.
See, where marijuana is really going to be an issue and has been an issue is in American cities, where the cities that use a kind of broken windows theory of policing, the theory is you arrest people for minor transgressions and it keeps things from getting out of hand. The problem is that that what they do is find a little bit of marijuana on somebody, arrest them, and then those people become part of the criminal justice
Right.
system, an enormous number of people. And this is a kind of new opposition to the stop and frisk, that what you're doing is putting too many people into the system. But that's where the real battles are going on, that are not so much about whether you legalize it or not, it's what you do with folks that are smoking.
And that really started with Rockefeller in New York. back in
Well,
the
that's right.
70s,
Oh, yeah.
And our criminal justice system has more people in prison, something like 2 million people, than just about any other country in the world. And yet a good many of them are in there for nonviolent crimes. They should not be incarcerated with killers and so forth.
We've changed some of the federal laws, so they're
We
getting
have.
out sooner. And some of the states are changing the prison, the length of sentences because they can't afford to keep people in that long. California's doing that for sure.
But my point was that in Alaska, which just started, they can't legally get marijuana in there.
I suppose
Well, they're going to grow it there.
They'll grow it
I'm assuming.
indoors. Oh, yeah.
That's
But
where-
how are they going to get the seeds?
Oh, they'll find a way.
yeah,
I'm
the
confident
seeds are probably there already.
I'm confident that the black market is
You know
operating
how the
quite well.
stork brings babies? That's what's going to happen. The Pakalolo stork is going to fly
Those
over.
are long and cold nights in
No,
Alaska.
yeah. If you spent any time in Alaska, you know that there's plenty of opportunities, plenty of latitude, plenty of non-surveillance.
When the aurora borealis comes up, you want to be able to see it with the right frame of mind. I hope we covered that topic.
That's right. It's like it's like 3X stoners.
Oh boy.
All right, so what else do you want to talk about?
How can we go
Light up.
How can you move on from that one?
That's good. Can we go back to the governor's races, because that's really
Sure.
that's interesting for two reasons. Because thanks to people like Scott Walker, there is now a very clear model of how a very conservative governor, along with a legislature that is controlled by the same party, which is what Scott Walker in Wisconsin had. Everybody said that it was Scott Walker who brought about the, fighting against and really crippling the public employees unions, all kinds of things like that. The only reason he could do it was that the legislature cooperated. You're going to see a lot more of that with Republican governors now that they're in control. You're going to see a lot more ferment in regard to legislation. It's not the legislation that liberals are going to like. And you're also going to see, and that started yesterday, the day before, at the Republican Governors Conference, you're going to see the presidential candidates start to emerge from there, because frankly, the Republicans have pretty lousy candidates coming out of the Senate, or at least flawed. There's a few around. The ones that are around are too much like what the Republicans have had problems in the past. They appeal to a certain group. Ted Cruz is one.
Rand Paul.
Rand Paul for different reasons.
Marco Rubio.
Yeah, Marco
of Florida.
Rubio is a little less. And you don't have the heavy hitters like Jeb Bush speaking. So there's probably governor of Ohio, governor of Wisconsin.
Kasich in Ohio.
The governor of Wisconsin yesterday pretty much declared his candidacy in an interview with the
I mean, it's
Milwaukee
only 2
Journal.
years away,
Yeah,
and he survived a recall effort as well. But
And he won, yeah.
yes, he did.
So-
But not only with that, in other states, Republicans that looked like they were in trouble survived. Brownback in Kansas, here he is,
That's
basically
amazing.
totally cutting services, money for education, and what do you
Trashing
know?
the budget.
And
Trashing
what do
the
you know?
budget.
There's a deficit all of a
When
sudden.
you want to know about the power of party identification,
Yeah.
which I'm always talking about,
Yeah.
you can look at that election. People came back
And voting restrictions.
Oh, yes.
We
Oh,
see
yes.
many more of that.
Yes. You see-
You know, one of the things I've always wondered about that is it that big of a deal to show an ID? And the argument is that it's not easy for everyone to get an ID. And I have some sympathy for that. The suspicion is that it's used to turn away minorities, people that tend to vote Democrat. Do you think there's much to that?
I think it's possible. It's hard to know. You don't have any kind of natural experiments to do it.
I haven't seen much evidence of actual voter fraud.
There isn't. There's almost no.
There's no evidence.
No, and there's no evidence of voter fraud. So you decide how you want to enforce things. If in fact the non-requirement isn't causing any problems, I'm as much worried about what they're doing, say in I believe it's North Carolina, where they basically disenfranchise college students, don't let them vote there. So I mean, what really bothers me is not just those laws, because I think the laws, there's a kind of a legal backlash to them. The courts are throwing out some of the stuff in excess. But it's in some ways, to me, another manifestation of the issue of race that pops up every once in a while here.
And it is happening in states
Sure.
with whites, Republicans in control and whatnot, and with sizable black or Latino populations. So we'll just edit that out. Are you okay?
Yeah, that's right. Maybe.
It's just air conditioning.
It is. It's a little dry in
Would you
here.
like some medical marijuana?
We can put some on you.
Hey, listen, I'm one of these ex-hippie retired professors from the 60s. You have a responsible position with the League of Women Voters.
We can
Be
get
ashamed of yourself.
Get that in brownie form if you like.
That's right, yes.
Actually, it might make me cough.
That's true.
And again, it might make you not care if you're coughing or not. So, man, this show is.
Yeah, you're actually going to air this program. Is that right, Pearl?
We'll see.
I think, but you really see the stages of marijuana legalization and what begins to happen as it becomes more accepted. It must be the Denver Post. It has a marijuana critic, like you have a wine critic and a theater critic. Yeah, and he's
What a tough gig.
well, it was his on the job. I mean, let's say that he didn't study that at the university, but he's quite expert when he took over. So.
People are going to think we smoked a little something before we did this program, I have a feeling.
I'm having my senior moment.
That's all right.
There was an amendment that passed in 5 states that was very good, and I can't remember what the subject was.
But it was a good amendment.
Yes, yes. In 5
Not
states.
the one to increase minimum wage.
It's minimum wage.
Was it minimum wage?
Yes, that was it. Yes.
Well, there's another example of a progressive view happening on the mainland. That finally happened here. It took a long time, but we're still not anywhere near where we need to be. The federal minimum wage hasn't increased yet.
And that, again, is one of those that's not necessarily associated with progressive states. There's certainly conservatives in these states fought it, but some of those states that got it, as I remember, are not all that on the forefront. Right. Yeah. Again, it has to do with the process. I think that if you put that thing to an amendment, it has, the same thing gets amendments passed that makes amendments lose. If it doesn't appeal to common sense, then, and common sense in quotes, then it's likely to lose.
But then isn't this another example of, the Republicans, very conservative, swept the nation, and yet the nation is not that conservative. When it comes to particular issues, the nation is quite progressive.
Well, at least it's certainly more progressive than the legislature. There was an interesting study done, and Colin and I have talked about this one, that basically shows, and it's a huge study, it's very sophisticated, basically shows that if you're poor, or if you're lower middle class, you have absolutely no influence in Washington. If you look at what these people over the years have asked for and what they've been able to get, it's nothing, unless you get the support of business organizations and so on. Their percentage is really high. So part of it has to do with, it isn't just how liberal or conservative people are, it's the kinds of institutional access they have that are meaningful or not. And again, that's why I think that the referendum gives you something. that the other ones don't. I mean, I'm not a big fan of referendums in a lot of ways. I think the whole thing in California is a big
Yes.
circus. One, because there are too many, but two, it's big money on each side all the
Yes.
time. But nonetheless, some of these things happen that way. Yeah, it's not always what people believe. It's how you can make those beliefs work in a political system. And it's become increasingly hard, partially because of increased inequality, but also because of how we elect legislators now. If you're in a district that doesn't have a lot of mitigating factors, it's just pretty homogeneous, then that gets lost.
One other comment on the national elections, if I may. The reaction from Obama, unlike Clinton in '94, and unlike the second Bush in 2006, Obama has not interpreted this as a mandate, has not sought to really bend over. In fact, he came out of the gates swinging. The climate change agreement in China, obviously the immigration plan that's been for the net neutrality. I was a little surprised. Suddenly the guy got a little gas under him.
Yeah, no, that's right. That's right.
And there's Mitch McConnell going, well, you didn't listen to the left.
Yeah, that's right. No, I mean, he said he was going to do it on immigration reform, so that doesn't mean he was going to do it for sure, but it would be harder to back away. The other two were
It was definitely surprised with China, almost Nixonian in the secrecy.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
Although McConnell criticized that right away.
Of course he
saying,
did. Well,
China doesn't have to do anything for 16
well,
years.
but remember, it has coal implications.
That it
So it's
does.
not just being a Republican. He's a Republican from coal
Kentucky,
country.
yeah, exactly.
That's right.
So.
And I understand that the agreement with China, it's not so much that they don't have to do anything until 2030, but that they have to have energy from renewable sources. I think 20% of their energy has to come
It's really
from.
more of a symbolic thing to have the
Yeah.
world's two greatest contributors to greenhouse gases coming forth and reaching an agreement that at least lets other countries know, hey, if they're going to do this,
Yeah.
what's a country like India and so forth going to do? And that was really quite a promising development.
And it seems to be consistent with what a lot of people who know more about this issue than I do were saying that China was going to do, that the climate issues and the pollution issues were really getting out of hand there, and that they were starting to get a lot of internal dissent. In that
And it's still not going to be enough to stop the rise of the oceans,
Which is a
affects
related thing.
us
But just
right
one point
here.
on the pollution, it was fascinating. The government in China basically stopped automobiles from driving in Beijing.
Yes, I know.
And factories were shut down so that the APEC convention and the other events, so that the skies could clear over Tiananmen Square for at least a short while. I mean, I think even people in Beijing are going, I can't breathe here. There are people that are living in the city. But you're right, the rise of the oceans, that is the other big concern, and particularly the coastal communities that are so important. I mean, Shanghai is right on the coast. You don't want Hong Kong, I mean, those are the great economic engines, to say nothing of Los Angeles and New York and so forth.
But you have a climate change denial guy running the chair of the committee.
Inhofe.
Yeah.
Oh my!
Yeah. He's
And
not
he's
just a skeptic.
science committee, right?
He's a
Yes,
denier.
He's a denier. He's
He
an
flat out
active.
says, well, I'm not a scientist, but
Yeah, but they're all wrong. Yeah.
Oh, one of the comedians, I love this. The Republicans say, I'm not a scientist when it comes to climate change, but they're not asked, are you a doctor when it comes to abortion?
Well, but it's a political ploy. When you say I'm not something, what you mean is I'm smarter than those people. If someone says, I'm not an academic, I'm ready to get dumped on by that someone, right? It's going to come out meeting payroll, ivory tower, all that stuff.
and then we go and have the worst winter in recent memory, freezing temperatures in all 50 states, even Hawaii at top of Mauna Kea. What do you mean the planet's warming?
Yeah, I know. Yeah. Tell it to the people in Buffalo.
That's just amazing.
Yeah,
You know?
6 feet. Yeah, before
Are
Thanksgiving.
we going to have another polar vortex?
Apparently it was because of the lakes, right?
Yes.
The Arctic winds.
I
blowing
missed
up
the one in New York by 48 hours last night.
Aren't you
Yeah.
lucky?
Oh, yeah. Oh, man. I mean, I grew up in that kind of weather, but you don't want to have to do it again.
You're from Milwaukee,
Yes,
right?
I
So
am.
you had to experience that. I grew
Yes.
up in the Midwest and Colorado, and oh man, brutal.
No, Colorado is kind of
It's
tropical.
more mild, actually.
It is.
It
You get
is,
more
yeah.
snow.
There's
No,
actually
no.
a lot more sun in Colorado.
Sounds like two old guys talking about years ago. I remember the winter of.
72. 1972.
We had to walk to school.
Yeah, we had to walk
That's right.
through the snow.
Which I did, by the way.
Me
ladies
too,
and gentlemen.
actually.
Yes, I know. A two-car family was
Anything
not
to
something.
get a hold of that marijuana that was being sold at the schoolyard. I'm kidding. I'm sorry. Pearl, I hope we're not ruining this show.
No, no.
We're just going to replay this one over and over again during the holidays.
She's
People are
going to
watch
get
it at
fined.
home
Yeah,
and go, "Man, I love
she's
this
going to
show."
get fined by the FCC, right?
I think it's cable access. You can do anything you want. right?
Well, it's because no one pays attention.
As long as we're not obscene.
Yeah, it's
Yeah, that's right. That's right. It's
educational,
educational.
political, and government. We're hitting all the pegs right there.
But you know, back to this global warming.
Keep trying.
You're going. This is going to be off our subject for today,
Sure.
but you're going to be taking up Micronesia, which will really be affected by this ocean rise.
You know, I've talked to people already, and some of those islands are only 4 or 5 feet above sea level, and they're already seeing it. I mean, it's not nearly as visible. Well, it's happening in Florida, too.
Yeah.
People are already seeing it swamping their, but at least Florida, which is primarily flat, people have other places to go. If you're living in Micronesia, in the Marshalls,
Right.
for example, or Kiribati, there is nowhere else
You have to go to another island.
You have to leave, exactly. And that immigration is already starting to happen. And where are they going to go? Most of them are going to come to America because they have contacts here. So that's something that may give us another reason to wake up to these realities, because I think the science is pretty clear here.
And Civil Beat is going to be doing a series on
Yes,
this?
we are. Thanks for the plug. They're going to send me to Micronesia. I'll be gone by the time this show airs. And then we'll be studying Micronesians living in Hawaii and as well as the mainland. It's assimilation, it's immigration, it's racism, it's health benefits, and it's also an obligation. We did use them for nuclear testing, after all, in the
Right.
Marshalls.
And when we destroyed their homeland, we said, we'll take care of you. And
We took them off an island named Bikini, and we moved them to another island and said, you can't go back because it's irradiated, and what are you going to do? That destroys a culture. And there are Bikinians living to this day on other islands, and but it is a story that I think needs to be told. Civil Beat is going to put its publishing powers behind, and we hope to have that up in the spring sometime.
yes, I think it's important that we bring this up because I see letters to the editor. Why are we taking care of these people? You know, we just don't. We have no sense of history.
Yeah,
Yes.
and we actually give them money because we rent Kwajalein as a test. It's a military base out there.
Yes.
And we took over for the Japanese who colonized during World War II. It's a history that most people, they're much more familiar with Native Americans and even Native Hawaiians or Alaskans than they are with Micronesians.
They're not as culturally visible here as other groups. And
But that's starting to change.
yes, it is. Well, I
Yes.
mean, they're here.
Yes.
They're here. And it's that on the kind of emotional radar, the visual radar that people have, they don't fit into our kind of, our ethnic categories.
Well, we've run out of time, and we've run off our subject, but
Bring us back.
thank you.
Bring us back.
We talked about the national election today with a little bit of a side trip,
Yes, we did.
but
Trip.
thank you. Oh my! So thank you, Neil Milner from UH Manoa and Chad Blair of Civil Beat. I'm Pearl Johnson with the League of Women Voters of Honolulu. Thank you for watching.